What are psychedelics? A fairly simple and basic kind of question. However, the answers are anything but simple or basic. Psychedelics and the psychedelic experience can be many different things to many different people. In this video, I want to spend a little bit of time discussing what psychedelics are from three different angles or perspectives. The first is from a subjective perspective, or the types of things that users of psychedelics may feel. The second is from a categorical or taxonomical type of angle or perspective. And the last or third is different use contexts or perspectives on how psychedelics may act in different environments or settings. If you like this video, you can follow me on social media, Instagram, Facebook, as well as subscribe and follow my YouTube channel, or better yet, go to my website, spiritpharmacist.com, and join my email list. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with our three angles or perspectives. From the subjective perspective, psychedelics are potent and strongly psychoactive substances that give rise to non-ordinary states of consciousness. And this non-ordinary state of consciousness is characterized by many different things and may be characterized by different things at different times in different people. Psychedelics are known to enhance spiritual feelings or give rise to the types of feelings that human beings label as inherently spiritual, a sacred or positive mood, timelessness, a sense of oceanic boundlessness, and a sense of being connected to all things. There are drugs that give rise to high levels of suggestibility and high levels of emotional vulnerability. So from this perspective, the psychedelic induces a type of trance in which the person is more open to suggestion than they would normally be. They're drugs that amplify internal or external phenomena, and from this perspective, they've been conceived of as non-specific amplifiers of consciousness. In parallel, they're often considered to be mind-expanding types of substances or drugs, in that they broach new territory of the mind. So, in concert with this idea of being non-specific amplifiers of consciousness, we could think of our conscious mind as essentially usually being focused on a single point of attention. However, in the psychedelic space, this single point of attention broadens or opens, so it feels as if more information is available. And this information may or may not be in our typical conscious awareness, probably lives in subconscious or unconscious parts of our mind. However, under the influence of a psychedelic, these pieces of our consciousness are much more accessible. They can also change the meaning of perceptions, and I think that this one is important when considering how psychedelics may be used for therapeutic purposes, in that human beings are meaning makers, and we tell stories based upon our perceptions and based upon particularly events of the past. So being able to change the meaning of those perceptions and come up with new relationships to the world around us seems like there would be some type of inherent therapeutic potential with that type of property. Psychedelics are known to change our sensory perceptions and maybe even distort or blur them. For example, phenomena like synesthesia are not uncommon with use of psychedelics like LSD. Persons may see different types of fractal patterns in their vision, or experience music in a very different type of way because of the perception changing effects of psychedelics. Lastly, psychedelics tend to be drugs that heighten and deepen different types of emotional landscapes. So typically we have a range of emotions that are accessible to us, although much emotion may be repressed. And again, this feeds into what I believe is that the etiology of many different psychiatric conditions would be the repression or consistent repression over time of emotions that really need to be experienced and processed. So under the influence of a psychedelic, the emotional landscape is oftentimes potentiated, heightened, or expanded, in that not only do persons have the ability to experience extreme positive states, joy, bliss, or spiritual ecstasy, they also have the ability to experience negative emotional states in heightened ways, things like grief or sadness or even potentially anger. So I hope that what you're understanding from this section of the video is that the non-ordinary state that can occur from psychedelics is rather diverse overall. And instead of thinking of, well, I had a good time with a psychedelic or I had a bad time with a psychedelic, I think it's much more common that people experience a range or gamut of feelings throughout the time that they're under the influence of a psychedelic. Okay, let's go ahead and dive into a more taxonomical or categorical look at psychedelics. The kind of words that we use to explain what psychedelics are or to categorize psychedelics are quite diverse and have changed a lot over time. When psychedelics were first discovered or introduced by the West, not too long ago, around a century, maybe a century and a half, if you're talking about the psychedelic mescaline, they were conceived to be psychotomimetic, meaning that they tended to mimic psychotic states to an observer. So the term psychotomimetic is used to describe what an observer might notice about somebody under the influence of a psychedelic. However, from the subject's perspective, it's not really perceived or experienced as a psychotic state normally. The term hallucinogen was first coined or came about around the subjective experience of psychedelics, and this is very one-dimensional in that it seriously just means to generate hallucinations. However, psychedelics rarely cause frank hallucinations. It would be very unusual for somebody under the influence of a psychedelic to look over and see a leprechaun in the corner. What would be much more common is if they were looking at something that was already there, perhaps a pattern on the wall or the tiles of their floor, and see the pattern shift, change, or even start to move in a motion that resembles a type of breathing. So psychedelics can cause hallucinations, particularly strong psychedelics at high doses. However, this really ignores the emotional landscapes or the consciousness expanding types of pieces that are very common to the psychedelic experience. Throughout this video, I've been using the term psychedelic, which in its word's roots means either mind manifesting or soul manifesting. Psyche in Greek means either mind or soul, and delic to manifest. So this is a very popular term for psychedelics because it's recognized that they give rise to experience with high degrees of personal significance and meaning for that individual user, in that it amplifies or manifests aspects of their own mind. Sometimes you'll hear psychedelics referred to as entheogens. This word means to cultivate the divine from within, or to cultivate God from within. So entheogen is a term that explicitly labels psychedelics as being able to generate spiritual types of states. Some other more modern terms around psychedelics are things like enactogens. Oftentimes, phenethylamine psychedelics, such as MDMA, are described as enactogens, meaning to touch within, meaning that users, instead of feeling an inherent sense of oneness or connectedness with all things, they tend to feel more connected to themselves. This is an enactogenic type of effect. Or an empathogenic type of effect, meaning that they're able to feel more connected with others. They're better able to read and be in touch with the emotional states of others. So enactogen or empathogen is a term that sometimes gets used, particularly with the designer phenethylamine psychedelics such as MDMA. Some exciting terms for me are neurobiological types of terms like psychoplastogen or neuroplastogen. So this describes psychedelic substances in their neurobiological capabilities. It's been shown that psychedelics can lead to synaptogenesis, or the ability for neurons that weren't talking to each other to form connections and begin talking to each other, or neurogenesis, the actual giving rise to new neuronal populations. So when we think about, can psychedelics rewire your brain, their ability to change the function of neurons seems highly related to that type of conceptual idea around psychedelics. Now, you could also conceive of psychedelics in other types of biological terms. Anti-inflammatory effects are part of the psychedelic repertoire at this point, and there is a budding field of research looking at the seemingly very potent anti-inflammatory effects of psychedelics. And lastly, if we're talking about psychedelics for changing the way that people think and feel, particularly when you're talking about treating a mental illness, you could also conceive of psychedelics as psychotropic types of compounds. So I find this very interesting, the sort of genesis in categorical or taxonomical names for psychedelics, and believe that some of the more recent terms, psychedelic, entheogen, and psychoplastogen, really fit the bill of what psychedelics are much more closely than some of the earlier terms like psychotomimetic or hallucinogen. Okay, let's go ahead and finish this video by talking about what psychedelics are in some different kinds of use contexts. The use context of a psychedelic could have major ramifications as to what kind of experience that user has, as well as what the post-use effects of the psychedelic may be. And this is colloquially known as a set and setting type of framework, as in what the person is bringing to the experience as far as their mindset, their preparation, their planning and organization around the experience really matter, as well as the actual setting or the physical environment that the psychedelic is ingested in, what the surroundings are, who is present or not present during the experience, the type of stimuli they're exposed to, whether it be lights or music or lack of those things, as well as what the physical makeup of the person is, things like concurrent substances or medications that they may be taking, as well as the psychedelic of choice and, of course, the dose of the psychedelic of choice. You know, psychedelics to me are drugs, and the term drug in pharmacology is not really a very stigmatic term. However, in society, the term drug is often associated with drug abuse, and indeed, psychedelics today are regulated as illicit substances, which means the government has labeled them as substances with high potential for abuse and little to no therapeutic value, or an inability to be used safely even with medical supervision. And we know that data supports all of those things are categorically false about psychedelics. However, language really has a lot of meaning to people. So just using the term psychedelic drugs, for example, could really change the set and setting for someone to start thinking unconsciously that they are doing something abusive when they really aren't. Psychedelics can be used in recreational types of settings or perhaps nightlife types of settings purely for play and enjoyment. And there are potential benefits to using psychedelics in recreational or recreational types of ways, in that it allows people to playfully recreate themselves. And oftentimes, psychedelics are paired with things like drums or dancing, and the people are using these other tools that are available to deepen the recreation and deepen the types of spiritual trance states that can come about in those types of settings and use contexts. Psychedelics are now being used as part of structured psychotherapy types of interventions. So, for example, MDMA-assisted psychotherapy in phase 3 trials consists of 3 MDMA sessions spaced around a month apart, although it's embedded within a larger type of psychotherapy structure in which a person begins preparation psychotherapy and has several sessions before their first use of MDMA. They continue psychotherapy sessions weekly between uses of MDMA, and then after the third MDMA session, continue to do psychotherapeutic work for some period of time. So, thinking about therapeutic uses of psychedelics, they are in the set and setting of larger therapeutic types of infrastructures. The last pretty common use context for psychedelics is a ritual or religious worshiping type of use for psychedelics. And this use of psychedelics really has been around for thousands of years, and various indigenous tribes around the world have used psychedelics this way. At this point, there is much in the way of neo-shamanic types of rituals, or persons that are bringing their own twist to the spiritual ingestion of psychedelics, yet doing it in a very revered and structured kind of way. Now, there is quite a bit of overlap between these different types of use contexts. For example, even in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, they may be playing music that is evocative or inherently has some type of emotion changing or spiritual type of quality and effect. And oftentimes in ritual types of use contexts today, there is some type of preparation and integration sessions or work that are happening before or after the ritual, even if they aren't conducted by licensed psychotherapists. So I hope what you're taking away from this is that if choosing to use a psychedelic, you really have to be conscious and cognizant of what type of experience that you're trying to have and matching it with the types of use contexts that are out there and most likely to elicit that type of effect or experience. I hope that you've enjoyed learning a little bit about what psychedelics are from the context of subjective experience, taxonomical categorization, as well as the different use contexts that are out there. And again, I want to emphasize that psychedelics are many different things to different people, and there may be things that are absent from this video that people have experienced with psychedelics. The most beautiful part of the psychedelic experience, or one of the most beautiful parts, is that it's experiential in nature and that nobody can truly tell you what the psychedelic experience is. It's a process of personal discovery. If you like this video, go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow me on Facebook or Instagram, or join my email list. Until next time, stay well.